You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 14. Lin Ruhai is conveyed to his last resting place in Suzhou. And Jia Baoyu is presented to the Prince of Beijing at a roadside halt. When Lai Sheng, the chief steward of the Ningbo mansion, learned that Shi Feng had been invited to take on the management of the household, he called his cronies together and addressed them in the following terms. Well lads, it seems that they've called in Mrs. Lien from the other house to run things here for a bit, so if she should happen to come round asking for anything, or have occasion to talk to you about anything, be sure to do what she says, won't you? During this coming month we shall all have to start work a bit earlier, and knock off a bit later than usual. If you'll put up with a little extra hardship just for this month, we can make up for it by taking things easy when it's over. Anyway, I'm relying on you not to let me down. She's well known for a sour-faced, hard-hearted bitch is this one, and once she's got her back up, she'll give no quarter, no matter who you are. So be careful. There was a chorus of agreement from the rest. One of them did observe, half-jokingly, that by rights they could do with someone like her to straighten things up a bit, considering the state they had got into. But just at that moment Bridie's wife arrived on a mission from Shi Feng. She was to take receipt of some ledger paper, buckram, and book labels, and had a tally in her hand, and a slip of paper specifying the quantities required. The men pressed round her offering her a place to sit, and a cup of tea to drink, while one of them hurried off with a list to fetch the needed items. Not only that, but having fetched them, he carried them for her all the way to the inner gate of the mansion, only handing them to her then so that she could take them into Shi Feng by herself. Shi Feng at once ordered Sunshine to make them up into stout workbooks for use in the office. At the same time she sent for Lai Sheng's wife and asked her for the register of the household staff. She also told her to get in touch with all the married females on the staff and arrange for them to assemble first thing next morning to be told their new duties. Then, after roughly checking through the numbers in the establishment sheet and questioning Lai Sheng's wife on a few points, she got into her carriage and drove back home. At 6:30 next morning she was back at the Ningbo mansion. By this time all the married women on the staff had been assembled. Not daring to go in, they hung about outside the window listening to Shi Feng discussing work plans with Lai Sheng's wife inside the office. Now that I'm in charge here, they heard her telling the latter, I won't promise to make myself agreeable. I haven't got a sweet temper like your mistress, you know. You won't find me letting you do everything just as it suits you. So don't let me hear anyone saying we don't do it that way here. From now on, whatever it is, you do it the way I tell you to, and anyone who departs by as much as a hair's breadth from what I say is for it good and proper, no matter how senior or how important she thinks she is. Having delivered herself of this formidable preliminary, she ordered Sunshine to call the roll. One by one the women stepped into the office to be looked at. When she had looked at them all, Shi Feng proceeded to make her dispositions. This 20 here. I want you to divide yourselves into 2 shifts of 10. Your job every day will be to look after lady visitors and serve them tea. That's all you have to do. Nothing else. This 20 here. I want you divided into 2 shifts like the others. Your job will be serving tea and meals to the family. Nothing else. These 40. Again, 2 shifts. Your job is to look after the shrine, lighting fresh joss sticks, keeping the lamps in oil, changing the drapes. You will also take turns by the spirit tablet, making offerings of rice and tea, kowtowing when the visitors kowtow, wailing when they wail. That is your job and nothing else besides. You 4 are to look after the cups and plates, and so forth in the ladies' tea room. If anything is missing, you share the responsibility between you and a quarter of the cost will be stopped out of each of your wages. You 4 here are to look after the dinnerware, bowls, wine cups and the like. Anything missing will be stopped out of your wages. This 8 here. I want you to take charge of all funeral offerings sent in from outside. This 8. I want you to look after oil, candles, and paper offerings. I'm going to put the whole lot in your charge, Then whenever any is needed somewhere, you must go to wherever it is and supply them with whatever amount I tell you to. This 20 here. I want you doing night duty by rota. You are to see that all the gates are locked and keep a lookout for fires. You'll also be responsible for keeping the outside properly swept. The rest of you are to be divided up between the different apartments. Each of you will be responsible for the things in your own apartment, from furniture and antique ware down to spittoons and dusters. If the tiniest sliver gets lost or broken, you will be held responsible and will be expected to make it good. Lai Xing's wife will make a general inspection every day, and if she catches anyone idling, or gambling, or drinking, or fighting, or being difficult, she will at once bring them to me for dealing with. And there will be no favoritism. If I find you've done something wrong, I shan't care whether you've been in service here for 3 or 4 generations, it will make no difference to me. Well, now you all know the rules. From now on, whenever any trouble occurs, I shall know exactly who to hold responsible. Those who are used to working with me at the other place always have a watch handy, and everything they do, no matter how small a thing it is done at a fixed time. You may not have watches, but at least there is a clock in your master's drawing room you can look at. So here are the main times to remember. At 6:30 I shall come over to hear the roll call. At 10 o'clock I take my lunch. I shall see people with reports to make or tallies to collect up to, but not after 11 o'clock. At 7 in the evening, as soon as the paper offerings have been burnt, I shall make a personal tour of inspection, and when I get back from it, I shall issue those on night duty with their keys. Then next day I shall be back here again at 6:30. I dare say we are all going to be a bit overworked during the days ahead, but I am sure your master will want to reward you all for your trouble when this is over. Shi Feng now proceeded to supervise the distribution of supplies of tea, oil, candles, feather dusters, and brooms to some of her work parties, and to issue others with tablecloths, chair covers, cushions, mats, spittoons, footstools, and other furnishings, an entry of the amount supplied being made in the book as each consignment was handed over. A clear record now existed of what individuals were in charge of which parts of the household, what items they were responsible for, and what duties they were expected to perform. Gone now were the days when everyone picked the easiest tasks to do first, and the less popular ones never got carried out. Gone the convenient disorder in which objects had so easily strayed, no one ever knew how, from the rooms where they belonged. Even with the greatly increased coming and going occasioned by the bereavement, it was quieter now than it had been before, when muddle and confusion still prevailed. And the old idling and pilfering appeared to have been eradicated completely. Secure in her authority, respected and obeyed by all, Shi Feng might be forgiven for contemplating her achievement with a certain amount of satisfaction. Meanwhile Yusher was still unwell, and cousin Jin too crushed by his somewhat disproportionate grief to think much about eating and drinking. Shi Feng accordingly had all sorts of invalid slops for Yusher, and tempting little delicacies for cousin Jin prepared in the kitchens of the Ronghua mansion, and sent over each day to the prostrate couple. Cousin Jin reciprocated by instructing his own cooks to prepare dishes of the very highest quality exclusively for Shi Feng, and having them carried round to her in her little penthouse office. Shi Feng seemed quite tireless in the discharge of her extra duties. Every morning she would be over at the appointed hour to hear the roll call, and would sit there alone in her office, never once emerging to mix with the young Ningguo women of her own generation. Even when lady visitors arrived she remained in the office, and took no part in their reception. The 35th had now arrived, an important day in the penitential cycle of 7 times 7 days preceding the funeral, and the monks in the main hall had reached a particularly dramatic part of their ceremonies. Having opened up a way for the imprisoned souls, the chief celebrant had succeeded by means of spells and incantations in breaking open the gates of hell. He had shown his light, a little hand mirror, for the souls in darkness. He had confronted Yama, the judge of the dead. He had seized the demon torturers who resisted his progress. He had invoked Kitagarbha, the savior king, to aid him. He had raised up a golden bridge and now, by means of a little flag which he held aloft in one hand, was conducting over it those souls from the very deepest pit of hell who still remained undelivered. Meanwhile, the 99 Taoists in the Celestial Fragrance Pavilion were on their knees offering up a written petition to the Three Pure Ones and calling on the Jade Emperor himself in his heavenly palace. Outside, on their high staging, with swinging of censers and scattering of little cakes for the hungry ghosts to feed on, Zen monks were performing the Great Water Penitential. And in the shrine where the coffin stood, 6 young monks and 6 young nuns, magnificently attired in scarlet slippers and embroidered copes, sat before the spirit tablet quietly murmuring the dharni that would assist the soul of the dead woman on the most difficult part of its journey into the underworld. Everywhere there was a hum of activity. Knowing that the day would be a busy one bringing a greater than usual number of visitors, Xueqin had risen at 4 o'clock in the morning to begin her toilet. By the time she had completed it, paid her daily tribute to nature, washed her hands, drunk a few mouthfuls of milk, and rinsed out her mouth, it was already 6:30 and Bridie's wife, at the head of the other female domestics, had been waiting for some considerable time in the courtyard outside. At last she emerged and stepped into the waiting carriage. 2 horn lanterns inscribed in large characters with the words Rongjiuo House were borne before her as she went. The great gate of the Ningguo mansion was hung with lanterns, and there were rows of identical standard lanterns on each side of the gateway illuminating the entrance with the brightness of noonday, and eerily emphasizing the whiteness of the mourning clothes worn by the menservants lined up to receive the carriage. At their invitation it was drawn in through the centermost of the 3 gates. Then the menservants retired and Xueqin's own women hurried forward, and raised the curtain of the carriage for her to descend. She did so, leaning on the shoulder of her maid Felicity, and the 2 women with the lanterns led her in, lighting the way for her as they went, while her other women closed in behind her, and the women of the Ningguo household advanced to meet her, curtsied, and chorused their morning greetings. Xueqin walked slowly through the all-sense garden until she came to the shrine in the Ascension Pavilion. As soon as she caught sight of the coffin, the tears, like pearls from a broken necklace, rolled in great drops down her cheeks. A number of pages were standing stiffly in the courtyard outside awaiting the command to set fire to the paper offerings. Xueqin gave orders for them to begin and for tea to be offered up inside the shrine. At once there was a clash of cymbals followed by the mournful strains of a funeral band. An armchair had already been called for and set down facing the spirit tablet. In this Xueqin now sat, and raising her voice to a shrill pitch, wept with abandon, whereupon the entire household, high and low, male and female, indoors and out, responded by breaking into loud and prolonged lamentation. Presently a representative of cousin Jen and Yushur arrived and begged Xueqin to desist. Bridie's wife poured out a cup of tea for her to rinse her mouth with, and when she had sufficiently recovered herself she rose to her feet once more, took leave of various members of the clan who were present, and went off to her office in the penthouse. An inspection of the roster showed that all the members of her work parties were present except for one woman belonging to the group responsible for the reception of friends of the family. Someone was sent to fetch her, and presently the woman arrived, flustered and fearful. "So it is you," said Xueqin with a chilling smile. "I suppose you thought that because you have a somewhat more ladylike job than the rest, you could afford to disobey my orders." "Oh no, madam, indeed not," said the woman. "I've been coming extra early every day. It's only today, because I overslept, that I'm a bit late. Please let me off this once, madam. It really is the first time." Just at that moment Xueqin observed Wang Xing's wife from the Rongguo mansion, peeping round the door as if looking for a chance to speak to her. "Yes, what is it?" she asked, turning away from the offender, but giving her no indication that she might go. Wang Xing's wife approached and said that she wanted a tally authorizing the purchase of silk cord to be made up into carriage trimmings for the funeral. She handed Xueqin a slip of paper on which the order was written. It specified the number of network trimmings that would be required for 2 large sedans, for small sedans, and 4 carriages, and the number of pounds of silk cord that would be required for that amount of network. Xueqin made Sunshine read it out to her, and having satisfied herself that the figures were correct, told him to enter them in his book and to issue Wang Xing's wife with one of the Rongguo tallies, whereupon the latter hurried off to complete her mission. Xifeng was about to address the latecomer when 4 more servants from the Ronghua mansion came in asking for tallies. She told them to hand over the order slips and made Sunshine read them out to her. 2 of them contained errors, and Xifeng flung them down and told the bearers to go away and come back when they had got their figures right. The 2 of them went off crestfallen. Xifeng next observed Zhang Kai's wife hovering about at the edge of the room and asked her what she wanted. "It's those carriage curtains, ma'am. We want the money for the tailor who made them up." Xifeng took the bill and told Sunshine to enter the figures from it in his book. But she would not authorize Zhang Kai's wife to pay for the tailoring until Wang Xing's wife had returned the tally for the material used and the buyer's receipt. There was a second piece of paper which Sunshine now read, requesting permission to purchase paper for the windows of Bao Yu's outer study, which had just been redecorated. This too Xifeng kept, and made Sunshine enter the amount in his book. She told Zhang Kai's wife that the goods must be supplied first before any payment could be authorized. "Tomorrow another one will be late, and the day after that it will be someone else," said Xifeng turning to the still waiting offender, "and before we know where we are we shall have no one turning up at all. I should have liked to let you off, but if I'm lenient with you the first time, it will be that much harder for me to deal with someone else the second time, so I am obliged to make an example of you." Her face hardened as she pronounced sentence, "Take her out, and give her 20 strokes of the bamboo." Seeing that Xifeng was really angry, the servants dared not show themselves slack in executing her command. The wretched woman was half-dragged from the room, and the flogging administered in full view of the waiting throng, after which they came in again, the executioners to report that they had discharged their duty, and their victim to thank Xifeng for her punishment. Xifeng threw down one of the Ningguo tallies. "Take this to Lixing and tell him to stop a month's pay from her wages. If anyone is late tomorrow, they will get 40 strokes, and the day after that it will be 60. So if you enjoy being beaten you have only to come late for roll call. Dismiss." The servants, including the shamefaced and silently weeping victim, trooped off to their various duties. Now began a steady stream of servants from both households collecting and returning tallies, each of whom Xifeng attended to in a brisk and efficient manner. From that day onwards the staff of the Ningguo mansion realized just how formidable Xifeng could be and went about their duties in fear and trembling, not daring to idle or delay. But let us now turn to Bao Yu. On this particular occasion, fearing that with so great an influx of visitors Qin Zhong might find himself somewhat overwhelmed, Bao Yu brought him round to Xifeng's office for a quiet chat. "Did you smell the food?" said Xifeng with a laugh. She was halfway through her lunch when they entered. "Come up on the Kong and have some." "Thank you, but we have already eaten," said Bao Yu. "Here, or in the other house?" "Catch me eating here with those clowns," said Bao Yu. "No, back at home, with grandmother." He and Qin Zhong sat down, and presently Xifeng finished her lunch. Just then a woman came in asking for a tally with which to obtain a fresh supply of oil for the altar lamps. "I calculated that you would be needing some by now," said Xifeng with a smile. "I thought you must have forgotten. If you had forgotten, you'd have had to pay for it yourself. That would have suited me down to the ground." "Oh no, madam. As you say, I just forgot. I only thought of it a moment ago, and I realized that if I didn't hurry, I should be too late to get a tally." So saying, she took her tally and went. For a short while longer the handing over of tallies and registering of amounts continued. "Both your houses use these tallies for everything," said Qin Zhong, who had been watching these transactions with some interest. "Suppose some outsider were to forge one and use it to get a lot of money with?" "Not everyone is as crooked as you are," said Xifeng good-humoredly. "How is it that there is no one from our place coming in for tallies?" Bao Yu asked. "At the time when they come," Xifeng replied, "you are still fast asleep in bed. Now let me ask you something. When are you going to begin studying at night?" "I should like nothing better than to begin today," said Bao Yu. "But what can I do if they won't get on with my study?" If you were to ask me nicely, said Shifeng jovially, I think I could undertake to hurry them up for you. Oh, you're no good, said Bao Yu, no more than any of the rest. They'll get round to it in time. It's just a question of waiting till they do. Whether they get round to it or not, said Shifeng, they still need materials for the job, and they can't get the materials if I don't choose to give them the tallies, I can tell you that for sure. As soon as he heard this, Bao Yu twined himself round Shifeng, and began coaxing and wheedling her to give the workmen the tallies that would enable them to begin work on his study. Stop it! Stop it, cried Shifeng. I am so tired that my bones ache. How can I stand up to being mauled about by a great ape like you? You needn't worry. They've just been round to see about paper for the windows. It would look pretty stupid if you were to send them off for something they have already got. Bao Yu refused to believe her until she made Sunshine look up the entry in his book and show it to him. While Bao Yu was inspecting the book, a servant announced the arrival of Shiner, one of the boys who had accompanied Jiao to Yangchao. Shifeng eagerly ordered him in. Shiner lauded to his mistress in the Manchu fashion, and hoped that she was well. Why have you come back, said Shifeng. The master sent me, ma'am. Mr. Lin died on the 3rd at 10 in the morning, and the master and Miss Lin are taking him to Suqiao to be buried. They expect to be home by the end of the spring. The master told me to bring back the news and to give everyone his regards, and he said I was to ask her old ladyship for instructions. He also told me to see if you were getting on all right, ma'am, and he said would I take some fur-lined gowns back with me for winter wear. Have you seen anyone else yet? Shifeng asked him. Yes, everyone, said Shiner, and withdrew. Shifeng turned to Bao Yu with a smile. It looks now as if your cousin Lin will be staying with us permanently. Poor thing, said Bao Yu. How she must have cried and cried during this past week or so. The thought of her crying made him knit his brows and sigh. Now that Shiner was back, Shifeng was all agog to question him about Jiao Yin, but could not do so in any detail in front of the others. She would have liked to follow him back home, but her duties were by no means over, and she was obliged to hold out until evening. Then, back in her own apartment, she summoned him to her, and asked him for full particulars of the journey. She looked out all Jiao Yin's furs, and she and Patience sat up into the night getting them ready and packing them, together with anything else which careful thought suggested might be needed, for Shiner to take back with him to his master. Shifeng gave Shiner minute instructions concerning his conduct towards the latter. Mind you look after your master properly away from home, now. Try not to make him angry. And do always be on at him not to drink too much. And don't encourage him to get mixed up with bad women. If, when you get back, I find out that you have done, I'll break your legs. Shiner laughingly agreed to abide by all her instructions. By the time they got to bed it was well past 1 in the morning. To Shifeng it seemed as though she had barely lain down to sleep, when it was dawn once more in time to get up again, and wash and dress for another round of duties at Ningguo House. The day of the funeral was now approaching, and Cousin Jin took an expert in geomancy with him in his carriage, and drove out to the Temple of the Iron Threshold to inspect the terrain and personally assist in the selection of a suitable resting place for Qinshi's coffin. He gave detailed instructions to the monk in charge, Father Sublimidas, for the provision of a completely new set of hangings and altar furnishings for the funeral, and for the engagement of as many fashionable monks as he could think of to participate in the ceremony of receiving the coffin. Sublimidas hurriedly prepared a vegetarian supper for his visitors, but Cousin Jin had little heart for eating, and, as it was by now too late to return to the city, presently retired to a bed that had been made up for him in the monks' quarters, leaving first thing next morning in order to press on with arrangements for the funeral. On his return he sent some workmen out to the temple to refurbish the place he had chosen for the coffin. They were instructed to work on the job throughout the night in order to make sure that it was finished in time. He also sent out a number of kitchen staff to cater for the funeral party on its arrival. Shifeng, too, began to make her own careful preparations as the day of the funeral drew near. On the one hand, she had to select coachmen and bearers from the Ronghua staff for the carriages and sedans that Lady Wang and the other Ronghua ladies would ride in the procession. On the other hand, as she fully intended to take part in it herself, she had to find herself somewhere to stop at on the way as well as accommodation for the night after the funeral. The Dowager Duchess of Shanghua happened to die just about this time, and Xi Feng had to make the arrangements for Lady Xing and Lady Wang when they paid their visits of condolence and later when they attended the funeral. She had to see about birthday presents for the Princess of Xi'an. She had to write to her parents and get things ready to send to them when her elder brother Wang Ren returned with his wife and children to the south. And when on top of all this Jiao Lian's young sister Yingchun fell ill and needed doctor's visits and medicines every day, it was Xi Feng who had to puzzle over the diagnostic reports, discuss the patient's symptoms with the learned physicians, and decide on the relative merits of rival prescriptions. Indeed, so multifarious had her activities become that it would be impossible to list them all. As a consequence, she was far too busy to pay much attention to eating and drinking, and could hardly sit or lie down for a moment in peace. When she went to the Ningguo mansion, she was followed around all the time by people from the Ronghua mansion, and when she went back to Ronghua house, members of the Ningguo establishment would trail after her. Yet although she was so busy, a passion to succeed and a dread of being criticized enabled her to summon up reserves of energy, and she managed to plan everything with such exemplary thoroughness that every member of the clan was loud in her praises. Wake night arrived, the night when no one in the family may go to bed, and Ningguo house was crowded with friends and relations. Since Yusher was still confined to her room, it was left entirely to Xi Feng to do the honors. There were, to be sure, a number of other young married women in the clan, but all were either tongue-tied or giddy, or they were so petrified by bashfulness or timidity that the presence of strangers or persons of higher rank threw them into a state of panic. Xi Feng's vivacious charm and social assurance stood out in striking contrast, a touch of scarlet in a field of green. She was in her element, and if she took any notice at all of her humbler sisters, it was only to throw out an occasional order or to bend them in some other way to her imperious will. Throughout the whole of that night the Ningguo mansion was ablaze with lights. There was a constant bustle of guests being welcomed or seen off the premises, and all the liveliness and excitement that is customary on occasions of this sort. With the dawning of the day and the arrival of the hour deemed auspicious for its departure, 64 green-coated bearers arrived for the coffin, preceded by a great funeral banner bearing the following inscription: Mortal remains of the much lamented Lady Qinshi of the House of Jia, senior great-great-granddaughter-in-law of the Duke of Ningguo, nobleman of the first rank by imperial patent, and wife of the Right Honorable Jia Rong, honorary captain in the imperial bodyguard, Inner Palace, Northern Capital Division. The costumes, insignia, and funeral trappings were all glitteringly new, having been specially made for the occasion. Jewel, acting in the capacity of unmarried daughter of the deceased, smashed a bowl on the floor at the foot of the coffin, and as they bore it out walked in front with an impressive display of grief. Among the distinguished guests taking part in the procession were Niu Jizong, Earl, hereditary first rank, grandson of Niu Qing, Duke of Jinghua. Lu Feng, Viscount, hereditary first rank, grandson of Lu Biao, Duke of Ligua. Chen Ruiwen, Major General, grandson of Chen Yi, Duke of Qigua. Ma Shangda, Major General, grandson of Ma Kuei, Duke of Jigua. Ho Xiaokong, Viscount, hereditary first rank, grandson of Ho Xiaoming, Duke of Xiugua. The grandfathers of the above, together with the Duke of Shanghua, whose grandson Shi Guangzhu was in mourning for the Dowager Duchess and unable to attend, and the Dukes of Ronghua and Ningguo, had formed the well-known group often referred to by their contemporaries as the Eight Dukes. The other mourners included the grandson of Hh the Prince of Nannan, the grandson of Hh the Prince of Xining, Shi Ding, Marquis of Zhongjing, nephew of old Lady Jia, Jiang Zining, Baron, hereditary second rank, grandson of the Marquis of Pingyuan. Xueqin, Baron, hereditary second rank, and Lieutenant Colonel, Metropolitan Barracks, grandson of the Marquis of Dingqing. Qi Jianhui, Baron, hereditary second rank, grandson of the Marquis of Xiangyang. Xiao Liang, Chief Commissioner of Police, Metropolitan Area, grandson of the Marquis of Jingtian. Also present were the Marquis of Jinxiang's son Han Qi, General Feng's son Feng Ziying, General Chen's son Chen Yijun, General Wei's son Wei Ruolan, and a large number of other young gentlemen of distinguished parentage. As for lady guests, there were 10 or so large and 30 or 40 small palanquins, which together with the palanquins and carriages of the Jia ladies brought the total number of equipages to at least 110. These, with the innumerable bearers of insignia and other funeral trappings up at the front, formed a procession altogether more than a mile long. The procession had not advanced very far when it began to pass the decorated funeral bowers and tables of offerings put up along the sides of the street by friends and well-wishers of the family. From some of them the strains of funeral music struck up as it approached. The first of these bowers was the Princess of Dongping's, the second was the Prince of Nanan's, the third was the Prince of Xining's, and the fourth that of the Prince of Beijing. Of the original holders of these 4 titles, the Prince of Beijing had been highest in imperial favor by virtue of his great services to the crown. As a consequence, the title and the style of prince had been retained by his descendants. The present holder of the title, Shui Rong, was a youth still in his teens, a young man of great personal beauty and a modest and unaffected disposition. On receiving the announcement of the premature demise of the wife of one of the Duke of Ninggua's descendants, Shui Rong was reminded of the friendship that had formerly existed between the Duke of Ningguo and his own ancestor, both having fought in the same campaigns and shared hardships and triumphs together, and resolved to lay aside all considerations of rank in demonstrating his sympathy for the bereaved. 2 days previously he had paid a visit of condolence and made inquiries about the funeral arrangements, and now, today, intending to make a libation to the coffin as it went by, he had had his booth constructed at the roadside, and had instructed a number of his staff to wait there in readiness for his arrival. At 4 o'clock that morning the prince had to be present at the imperial palace for the early levee, but, as soon as his business there was over, he changed out of court dress and into mourning, and after getting into his great palanquin, was borne through the streets, preceded by gongs and umbrellas of state, to the place where his funeral bower had been erected. There his palanquin was set down, and the gentlemen of his household ranged themselves on either side of it. The street was kept clear of traffic and pedestrians while he waited. Presently the procession came in sight, advancing from the north end of the street like a great river, the hearse itself looking like some great silver mountain that crushed the earth beneath it as it moved. In a trice the forerunners had reported back to Cousin Jin, who at once gave orders to the insignia bearers to halt, and hurrying forward with his uncles Jiaxi and Jiazheng, saluted the prince with full court etiquette. The prince received their prostrations with a gracious smile, and a slight inclination of his person inside the palanquin, and when he spoke to them it was not as a prince to a subject, but using the form of address he employed when speaking to family friends. Your Highness, I am quite overwhelmed by the honor you do us in graciously condescending to be present at the funeral of my daughter-in-law, said Cousin Jin. My dear friend, said the Prince of Beijing, your excessive modesty does us both an injustice. Thereupon he turned to the chamberlain of his household, and ordered him to make offerings on his behalf. Cousin Jen and his uncles made the correct ritual responses, while this official performed them, then returned to the palanquin, and bowed their thanks to the prince. The prince received their thanks with a most becoming modesty, and by way of conversation asked Jiazheng a question about Bao Yu. Which is the boy who was born with a stone in his mouth? I have long looked forward to the pleasure of meeting him. I am sure he must be here today. Can you not bring him to see me? Jiazheng at once withdrew to fetch Bao Yu. He made him first change into court dress, before leading him forward to meet the prince. Bao Yu had often heard about the Prince of Beijing. He had heard that he was very clever. He had also heard that he was as handsome as he was clever, and that he was a quite jolly, unconventional sort of person who refused to let either his royal birth or the conventions of official life constrain him. He had often wanted to meet him, but had been deterred by his father's strictness from doing so. And now here was the Prince of Beijing asking to see him. A feeling of pleasant anticipation filled him as he hurried forward with his father. He peeped up at the prince as they advanced and saw that he was, as report had painted him, an extremely good-looking young man. But if you want to know about his interview with the handsome prince, you will have to read about it in the next chapter. You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you.